Hi, this is Lisa Gonzales, Chief Business Officer here in Mount Diablo Unified. And in this week's session of Ask the CBO, I've got a guest that's joining me, and we're going to talk about staffing and how Mount Diablo compares, especially to other districts in our area. So with me today, I have Matt Phillips. He's from School Services of California. And Matt, why don't you just tell us a little bit about you and your role?
Sure. Thank you, Lisa. It's an honor to join you here today on Ask the CBO. I feel very privileged to be with you. Good morning, everyone. I'm with School Services of California. We are a statewide organization that works with almost 1,000 districts up and down the state of California. There's 58 county offices. We spend some time working with county offices as well, and we dabble a little with charter schools. One of our primary missions at School Services is really being able to help communicate how districts fare, whether it be a comparative ranking using state certified data. We also will get involved in negotiations from time to time. We dibble and dabble in a number of things, but for the purpose of the conversation today, that's a little bit of background about the company.
Thank you. And I think one of the important things that we're going to take a look at today is just a number of data points that we've been able to collect about our district as compared to others. So why don't we go ahead and get started? So this is a slide right here that comes from the California Department of Education. And we've tried to make sure that as we put this presentation together, all of the data is identified in the bottom as far as where the source is. And this really takes a look at our enrollment over time. And so it doesn't mean that we're going down to zero, because this is a scale of 30,000 to 38,000 students, but you can certainly see the declining enrollment that we've been taking a look at over the course of probably the last 6 to 7 years. This year we're down just a hair under 30,000, about 29,900 or so. So when this chart from the Department of Education is updated, you would see a little bit more of a drop there.
And certainly the decline for Mount Diablo is not unique, Lisa. As a state, the state of California is declining enrollment. There's about 6 million students in the state of California. On average, the state loses about 20 to 30,000 students per year just through natural attrition, folks moving out, students matriculating into the workforce. In the 2021 year, though, an interesting point is the state lost about 150,000 students related to the pandemic. Many of those students are either homeschooled, have gone to private schools, and or moved out of state, but there's a pretty substantial decrease statewide. And so you are not alone in your declining enrollment challenges.
Thank you. That's a really good data point. I hadn't heard that number. Why don't you go ahead and walk us through many of these slides, particularly since you helped prepare these for us?
Sure, absolutely. So one of the things we do at School Services is we assist the state in compiling a number of different data points, whether it's salary information, financial information, in an aggregate manner that the state maintains in their database. And then, organizations like ourselves, also employee unions, all have access to this information. One of the really important things that I don't know that districts do enough when they assess, how are we doing as a school district? Well, one of the ways that you can do that is by looking at your own finances, your own programs, your own salary schedules against a comparative list of districts. And a big question is, well, who do we compare against? And we could spend 30 minutes going down a rabbit hole and talking about all the nuances. But this particular comparative list looks at a number of unified school districts around the Mount Diablo area. Now, for the viewers' edification, there's really 3 types of school districts. You have elementary school districts, high school districts, and unified school districts. The reason we chose unified school districts for this list is because all of these school districts educate children throughout the continuum, from the 4 and 5-year-old transitional kindergartners all the way up through the 18-year-old seniors, and even some dabble in adult education. And so we really wanted to give an apples and apples comparison based on the district type. Districts receive a number of different funding sources coming from the state, and the state is the primary giver of funding for school districts. This particular data point shows that for each of these school districts, how much they are receiving primarily from the state per student or per ADA. We don't have to get into the nuances of average daily attendance, so we'll just call it per student for the purpose of this conversation here. And you'll note that even though each of these school districts provides education for students from 5-year-olds all the way up through 18-year-olds, the amount of funding that is received by each district varies quite greatly. We've identified Mount Diablo Unified here on the list, and unfortunately for Mount Diablo, they are a little bit lower on this list than some of the surrounding districts, and that's through no fault of the district. That's through no fault of anyone working, living, residing in the boundaries of the district. That's really a result of how the state allocates money to school districts, and it's based on an equity measure, not an equality measure. And so districts that have a higher proportion of students that are either eligible for free or reduced price meals, English language learners, or foster youth students actually receive more per student, all things being equal, than districts with lower demographics or a lower percentage of students in that particular category. And so that's why you see districts such as Oakland and Vallejo at the top of the list, whereas districts such as San Ramon, Livermore, all the way up through Mount Diablo are towards the bottom of the list. So this chart really represents not all, but the lion's share of resources that are available to each of these school districts to run their operations. That includes compensation for employees, instructional materials for students, utilities to keep the lights on, transportation, all the day-to-day operations. And so when we think about where Mount Diablo is on the list, and we think about the resources available, the resources are actually less than what you would see in many of the comparable districts. And as we transition now, and so that's money coming in, right? It's always important that we understand what's available to us. Now let's look at money going out, and how do each of these districts spend those dollars that are coming in? This particular slide, and I will point out that this data is from 2018-19, which as of today, April 1st, is the most recently available state certified data. We are very hopeful to be receiving the 1920 state certified data later this month. And so hopefully, Lisa, I can join you again and we can provide an update using the 1920 data, but we can speak to it a little bit later on here in the presentation. So looking at this 1819 data, this is comparing how each of those districts that we just previewed on the previous slide, where are they spending their resources? Where have they prioritized the expenditure of those funds coming in? Recognizing that the amount of funds received by each of these districts does vary based on their student demographics. And so when we think about expenses for a school district, we think about the money we spend on people and then the money that we don't spend on people. Those are the two basic buckets. We're in the people business. Generally, we would see on average, a school district spends about 85 cents or 85% of their resources on people. And so you see that identified in the average here for all unified districts statewide, as well as the comparative group average. And Mount Diablo is certainly an outlier on this one by virtue of the fact that in the 1819 year, 94 cents of every dollar was spent on people. Now that includes all of the people that work at Mount Diablo. This is going to be all of our teachers, our custodians, our bus drivers, administrators. This also includes all of the benefits that come along with that, whether it be health and welfare benefits, pension-related benefits, CalPERS, CalSTRS. So this is the whole kit and caboodle in the aggregate, how much the district spends on people. In my experience at school services and looking at many districts' budgets and many different comparative lists, generally when districts get above the 90% threshold, meaning 90 cents of every dollar spent on people, there's some challenges on the non-people side of the budget, meaning we think about books, instructional materials, those other non-personnel costs, all things that are important in the education of students. There's just not a lot of meat on the bone to do other things because so much is invested in people. Conversely, when you get on the other side of the spectrum, recognizing that the average is about 85%, when you get down in the 80% range, as far as the amount that's spent on people, then you start running into challenges of being able to recruit and retain people because either the salaries are not competitive or the working conditions are so out of whack that it's difficult to attract folks.
Okay. let's jump in here to some different groups of employees. And the first one, let's go ahead and start with certificated non-management. And just to clarify for those that are watching, that would be anyone who has a credential but is not an administrator. So that's our teachers, our counselors, our psychologists. And this is how they compare in this category.
Right. So we're really taking that 94% that we just talked about, and we're going to break it down into a few different wedges. And the first wedge are the certificated non-management. Thank you for that description, Lisa. This particular chart identifies how much of the district's resources were spent on just salaries for certificated non-management. This does not include any pension payments, CalSTRS payments. This also does not include health and welfare payments, and I'm going to asterisk that last piece. So if you look at just salaries for certificated non-management, the district does rank relatively high on the list with 48 cents of every dollar going to certificated non-management salaries. The districts that are above Mount Diablo on this list are a bit unique, where they provide little to no health and welfare benefit for their teacher. This goes back to the mid-90s, where there was a decision made really in the Alameda and Santa Clara counties that the best way to attract and retain was to actually minimize contributions for health and welfare and put all the money on the salary schedule. So although the percentages are significantly higher when you look at Fremont and Pleasanton, the teachers in those districts do not receive a benefit for health and welfare from the district because all of the money goes to salary. And that's important because Mount Diablo and some of the other districts that are further down the list do spend a considerable amount of resources on health and welfare benefits for teachers. Unfortunately, there's no statewide data that identifies the benefit portion that's paid on behalf of teachers. That is all aggregate. So, when we look at the salary piece here, I would say Mount Diablo would actually move up that list even further if we were able to pull out the health and welfare piece. The other point that I'll make on this, Lisa, before we transition on to the next employee group is, what this tells me is one of two things. Because Mount Diablo has a high ranking on the amount of dollars that are allocated for certificated non-management salaries, that tells me one of two things. Either that the employees are more highly compensated than what you would see in surrounding districts, or you have a higher number of certificated non-management employees. Now, we're not able to parse out which is true. They could both be true, or one of those could be true, but at least one of those things has to be true for the district to maintain the high ranking that it has on this list.
I appreciate that clarification. Let's go ahead and take a look at classified non-management. For us, that would be a lot of our support staff. That would include all of our, our custodians, our bus drivers, our food service workers, everyone that works in classrooms to support. So that's our CSEA group. And then we have our secretarial, technical, and then anybody who's non-represented, like noon supervisors and that group. So this is how they compare.
Great. So again, high ranking from the district. The health and welfare benefit point that I made with the teachers on the previous slide doesn't always apply on the classified side. That being said, the district does still maintain a very high ranking for its classified non-management employees, those employees who do not have a teaching certificate, but also are not administrators. Again, what this tells me is one of two things has to be applicable here. And it's not mutually exclusive. They could both be applicable, but at least one of the two. Either the district more highly compensates its classified non-management employees than in surrounding districts, and or the district has a higher number of classified non-management employees when you consider that as a percentage of students or on a per student basis.
Let's take a look at administrators.
Great. So the third leg, and this is a pretty standard breakdown when you look at how we break down the people component of a budget: certificated non-management, classified non-management, and then management. This particular wedge of the pie includes both site and district administrators. And when I look at the ranking here for Mount Diablo, you're in the middle. You're average when you consider the percentage of your resources that are spent on administrators, again, using state certified data. Um, this doesn't necessarily lend itself to any conclusions about the pay of administrators and or the number of administrators, but looking at administrators in totality, the district is comparable, it's competitive in the amount of dollars that it spends on administrators.
Okay.
So this would help to flesh out the previous data point. When you consider the percentage of resources that are spent on administrators, looking at this from the other angle and trying to answer the second question of, do we have more administrators at Mount Diablo than the comparable district? And this particular table, again, using state certified data, would objectively say, no, we don't have more administrators than surrounding districts, because for each administrator, we have more than 1,000 students in the district based on the 1819 state certified data. Only 3 districts on this list had fewer administrators per student than Mount Diablo, where the districts with the smaller numbers, that means they have more administrators per student.
Here's
So,
our go ahead, unrestricted reserve.
absolutely. So without getting into the nuances of the calculation, this percentage identifies how much does a district have in its savings account, meaning how much is left over when the dust settles at the end of the 1819 fiscal year. And using the percentage, recognizing that each of these districts has different size budgets and different amounts of funding allocated to it, what this percentage shows is that relative to the total budget, the district has a smaller reserve than many of the comparable districts. The comparative group average, as illustrated on this slide, is 10.65%. The average statewide, if you look at all unified districts statewide, irrespective of demographics, number of students, the average is a 17% reserve. With the district at a 7% reserve, that's relatively low in the grand scheme of things. If we were to look at the same data point for elementary school districts, they're up around 20%. High school districts are around 16%. So if you aggregate all districts statewide, the average is about 17%. Reserves really help us out when we get in a pinch. If we find ourselves in a deficit spending scenario, which is very prevalent when you see a district in declining enrollment, reserves allow us the opportunity to be thoughtful about how reductions are going to be made so that we don't have to make those knee-jerk reactions and eliminate things just to maintain our solvency. Reserves are also helpful when we have cash deferrals, which is what we're experiencing right now. It allows a district to minimize the amount of borrowing that it would otherwise need.
Yeah, and I know it's been a topic in our district, but we did have to go out for a TRAN, a tax revenue anticipatory note. So because the state gave us an IOU, if you will, for the amount of money that we were expecting to get this year, we had to go out and get a $41 million TRAN that we have to pay back by the beginning of December.
Absolutely.
So, just in closing, would love to just talk a little bit about what you might expect to see in 1920, any other conclusions, and then some advice for one-time funds.
Sure. So, rolling forward to 1920 data, Lisa, when you look at how a district allocates its resources, it doesn't generally change a whole lot year over year. So going back to the first data point we looked at for 1819, if you spent 94% of your resources on people in 1819, absent a significant reduction in force in 1920, you should be spending about the same in 1920. I would fully expect you to be above that 90% threshold again in 1920, because we're in the people business. We certainly can't do what we do without people, but recognizing that there is a balancing point there, that the people are critically important to the mission of schools, but having updated instructional materials, making sure that we can continue to pay the utilities on a timely manner, implement other support services as well, are also critical to the instruction of students. So I wouldn't expect the percentages to change a whole lot in 1920, absent some significant change. Even going forward to 2021, certainly the 2021 year, we're in it right now, absent a significant change in the number of people or what we're paying to people, I would expect those percentages to continue forward.
And what are you thinking about one-time stimulus dollars. I know that we're certainly going to be getting them from a number of different directions. Any advice, any rules that you typically profess to districts?
Right. So, we can apply our own financial principles that we would use in our own personal life. If we receive an end of year bonus from our company, let's say we're so fortunate to do so, we don't go use that money as a down payment for a car, and then we have a recurring payment if we don't have a way to pay for the recurring payment. Right. So said another way, we don't want to use these one-time resources for ongoing expenses. Now, there's certainly ways that districts can use one-time resources to generate some savings in the future. Some of the intent of these one-time dollars that are coming to schools, certainly for the safe return of students to schools. So we think about HVAC upgrades, changes in windows. Well, not only does that increase safety for students, it could also decrease energy bills going forward, right? And so the investment of the one-time dollars in facilities could actually generate some semblance of savings and utility costs on an ongoing basis. But to go out and think about, well, I'll use hiring new employees as an example. We don't want to use one-time dollars to hire new employees, because once those one-time dollars run out, once they expire, their period of availability goes away, we have a decision to make, right? If we want to maintain those employees, we then have to pull from our current resources, which based on 1819, we're already spending 94% of our current resources on people, or we'd have to lay off those people. And that's a very difficult decision. The way that we avoid that decision is we don't spend one-time resources for ongoing costs.
Great advice. Well, Matt, we're going to cross our fingers and hope that those new reports are out soon. I know that we've been anxiously waiting. We sort of went back and forth. Do we wait on this presentation? Do we not? But I know that a lot of the emails that I get from parents, and again, you can email cbo@mdusd.org, but a lot of the questions we've really been getting are, how do we compare? How do we compare? So there you go. That's the information. Matt and I will certainly do a follow-up. And again, Matt, thank you for joining me today, and we look forward to talking again in the future.
My pleasure, Lisa. Take care, everybody.
Thanks.